Trapped in suffocating darkness, necks crushed, and fatal falls, today we uncover 8 horrifying cave disasters that will haunt your nightmares forever. With that being said, viewer discretion is always strongly advised. It all began on the morning of October 7th, 2001, a crisp autumn Sunday in upstate New York. Gage Caverns, a well-known limestone cave system near Schoharie, had long been a favorite spot for explorers eager to experience its hidden beauty. That day, 5 friends, Edward Galby, Kevin Shaw, Shio Kudo, Adam Dobson, and J.J. Bradingham, arrived at the cave around 10:30 a.m. They were a mix of seasoned cavers and excited newcomers, all looking forward to the thrill of venturing underground. Gage Caverns was famous among local adventurers, with its winding dry tunnels and water-filled passages carved out by underground streams over thousands of years. Before stepping inside, they double-checked their gear. The October air outside was cold, about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but they knew once they were underground, the cave would hold steady at around 52 degrees, no matter the season. Around 11 that morning, they entered through the main opening, a gaping black hole in the hillside that seemed to swallow the daylight whole. The first chamber was wide and tall, giving them room to gather and adjust. But as they pushed deeper into the cave, the passages quickly grew tighter and more confined. The group chose to start their journey by exploring the dry side of the cave. This route included a tricky stretch known as the balls down crawl, named for the uncomfortable method required to get through, lying flat on your stomach and inching forward along the cold, rough ground. For the first couple of hours, everything went smoothly. They snapped photos, admired strange rock formations, and shared moments of excitement as they moved deeper into the cave. By around 1 p.m., they made their way back to a larger chamber known as the amphitheater, a roomy space where several tunnels meet. It was the perfect spot to take a break, have some snacks, and plan their next move. The amphitheater was about the size of a small classroom, with a ceiling high enough for them to stand without crouching. Around them, several small, shadowy openings branched off into darkness, some barely more than cracks in the rock. One of these caught the eye of Shio Kudo, a 28-year-old graduate student who was still fairly new to caving. She was especially curious about a narrow horizontal crack that looked like it might lead to a hidden chamber beyond. The crack looked just wide enough, about 2 feet across and only 18 inches high. It seemed like someone might be able to squeeze through if they lay on their side. Since Kudo was the smallest in the group, she offered to check it out. Her friends watched as she carefully lay down and started sliding into the narrow space. But trouble started almost right away. What looked like a straight tunnel from the outside quickly turned into something much more dangerous. Just a few feet in, the passage suddenly bent sharply to the right, at a 90-degree angle that wasn't visible from where the others stood. Kudo had to twist her body awkwardly to follow the bend. She managed to get her upper body around the corner, but her legs remained stretched out behind her in the original direction, forcing her into a painful, twisted position. Things got worse fast. The crack narrowed even more just past the bend, closing in right where her ribs pressed against the jagged rock. Kudo quickly realized she was stuck. She couldn't move forward or backward. The rough limestone dug into her sides, and the tight space squeezed her chest, making it hard to breathe. She called out to her friends, trying to stay calm even though fear was creeping in. Kevin Shaw and Edward Galby rushed over, trying everything they could think of. They coached her to adjust her position, pulled gently on her feet, even tried pushing from her shoulders, but nothing worked. The sharp bend had turned into a cruel trap, catching her in a position that was nearly impossible to escape. After several failed attempts to free her, the group realized they needed outside help. And while the cave stayed at a steady 52 degrees Fahrenheit, that temperature now posed another risk. Stuck and unable to move, Kudo's body could start to lose heat dangerously fast, putting her at risk of hypothermia. Shaw quickly volunteered to go for help, while the others stayed behind with Kudo, doing their best to keep her calm and watch over her. Shaw made his way through the winding cave as fast as he could. Without wasting a second, he called emergency services, carefully explaining the situation and giving details about where Kudo was trapped inside the cave. Rescue teams were soon alerted, including experienced cave rescue units and emergency medical crews trained to handle these kinds of situations. Meanwhile, deep inside the dark amphitheater, Kudo's condition was getting worse by the minute. The pressure on her ribs made every breath a struggle. Her arm and hip were going numb from the hard, cold rock pressing into her side. But perhaps the hardest part was the mental strain, the crushing darkness, the claustrophobic space, and the creeping fear that she might not get out. Around 2:15 p.m., the first rescuers arrived at the cave entrance. They quickly split into teams and made their way toward the amphitheater, where Kudo was still trapped and struggling. By 3 p.m., the first rescue team reached her side. A paramedic immediately checked her vital signs. At that point, Kudo had been stuck for almost 2 hours, and the toll it was taking on her body and her mind was becoming clear. The rescue team tried the same methods her friends had already attempted, pulling from different angles, using lubricants to ease the friction, and gently rocking her body to see if they could free her. But the position she was stuck in, her torso twisted at an extreme angle, with her ribs crushed against the narrowing rock, made all these techniques useless. By 5 p.m., Kudo had been trapped for nearly 4 hours, and everyone could see her condition was worsening. The pain in her ribs had become excruciating, and the cold was draining her energy fast. Finally, around 7:20 p.m., 2 veteran cave rescuers, Joe Armstrong and Ken Fortin, made it to the scene. They brought specialized tools, including small drills and chisels made for breaking rock in tight spaces. After assessing the situation, they knew the hard truth. There was only one way to free Kudo now. They would have to carefully chip away at the rock that held her in place. It would be a slow, delicate, and risky process, but it was the only hope she had. Armstrong and Fortin had to work carefully in the cramped, claustrophobic space. Every move they made had to be precise. They couldn't risk dislodging more rock or creating dust that might make it even harder for Kudo to breathe. Through it all, Kudo stayed awake, but her body was wearing down. She had now been trapped in that brutal position for nearly 8 hours, her body twisted sideways, her ribs crushed, and every breath a struggle. Then, finally, just after 9 p.m., Armstrong and Fortin cleared enough rock that they could slowly and carefully ease her out. The pain as her blood rushed back into her numb, compressed body was overwhelming. Medics were ready. They wrapped her in warming blankets and immediately began treating her for hypothermia and compression injuries. Her ribs were badly bruised, and parts of her side were still numb from the hours of pressure. Instead of rushing her straight out of the cave, rescuers gave Kudo time to rest and regain her strength. They offered her warm fluids and kept a close eye on her condition. Only when she was ready did they begin the slow, careful journey back through the cave's twisting passages, helping her every step of the way. Finally, at 10:20 p.m., almost 9.5 hours after she first became stuck, Shiu Kudo emerged from Gage Caverns into the cold night air. Paramedics were waiting to take her to the hospital for further care. Amazingly, after everything she'd been through, she suffered no permanent injuries, just severe bruising, temporary nerve damage, and, of course, the lasting emotional scars of her terrifying ordeal. Later, local caving experts like Tom Engel reflected on the incident, pointing out that in the early hours of the rescue, there had been confusion over exactly how long Kudo had been trapped. This may have delayed the response. Engel stressed an important lesson for all cavers. If someone is stuck and can't be freed within 15 minutes, it's critical to call for help immediately. July 13, 2003. A sweltering morning in Georgia. Bruce Brewer, 33, was preparing for what seemed like another routine trip into Climax Cave. He wasn't new to this. Bruce had explored Climax Cave over 100 times. He knew every twist, every turn. Years of experience made him a trusted guide, especially for newcomers. That day, he was leading 7 researchers from a local ecological center. Their goal: study the cave's ecosystem and record the eerie sounds of the bats nesting deep inside. At 11 a.m., the group gathered near the entrance. Bruce, calm and composed, briefed them on what to expect. Most of the group had never stepped foot underground before. Helmets on, headlamps lit. They followed Bruce into the darkness. Climax Cave was a massive, twisting labyrinth, famous for its tight corridors and hidden chambers. For those who dared to enter, it was part adventure, part endurance test. And that day, it was about to push its limits. Bruce moved confidently through the cave, pointing out formations, guiding the group through tight spots, and keeping careful count. The first few hours passed in awe. For the newcomers, the cave was a thrill. Twisting paths, sudden drops, and a silence that felt otherworldly. As they pushed farther in, the passages tightened. Crawling, climbing, and squeezing became more demanding. But morale stayed high. By evening, they arrived at Razor Hall, one of Climax Cave's most well-known chambers. It got its name from a sharp, narrow rock blade suspended above a still, black pool. The pool was cold and deep, with a thin, slick ledge hugging its edge. Beautiful, but dangerous. This room wasn't just another stop. It was a warning wrapped in wonder. Across the pool, a natural rock wall marked the boundary between Razor Hall and the Turnage Room, the next point on their planned route. Crossing that pool meant precision. One mistake could send someone into the freezing water below. Bruce knew that. He'd crossed it many times, but every trip into the cave carries its own risks, some visible, some hidden, waiting to change everything. Normally, there were 2 ways to reach the Turnage Room: crawl along a narrow ledge beside the pool, or swim beneath a submerged partition. But today, things were different. Heavy rains in the days prior had raised the water level. The ledge was now barely visible above the surface, and the partition had no air gap beneath it. Bruce studied the scene, his expression shifting. He told the group this was the highest he'd ever seen the water. He'd check it out first before deciding how to proceed. He stepped into the icy pool. Water climbed to his chest. After a breath, he ducked under the partition and disappeared. Ripples spread across the water. Minutes passed, then more. He was supposed to return quickly, but nothing. The group called out, no answer. They assumed he might have surfaced in the Turnage Room and couldn't hear them. Still, silence. Some began pacing, nervous glances. Their leader was gone, and no one knew why. They turned off their headlamps to save power. That's when they saw it, a dim, flickering glow under the partition. Pale, unsteady, strange. It moved, but didn't rise. The light offered no answers, only more questions. Panic set in. Desperate, a few members waded into the freezing pool. Clinging to the edge, they reached beneath the water, hands searching the dark void blindly, hoping for any sign of Bruce. But the silence remained, and the light kept flickering. The water was icy, and their hands came up empty. Bruce had vanished. Reality hit hard. He was gone, and they were deep inside a dangerous cave with no guide. They had no choice but to retreat. Razor Hall was no place to wait. Without Bruce, the cave became a maze. What had felt manageable under his lead now turned disorienting and hostile. Their memories were scattered, the fear growing with every wrong turn. When they finally emerged at 11:30 p.m., they were exhausted, physically shaken, emotionally wrecked. Outside, they called for help. Local authorities arrived fast, but quickly realized this was beyond a standard search. They brought in Will Summer, a veteran cave rescuer who knew the system well. 2 Sheriff's Department divers joined him. At 2:30 a.m., the rescue team descended into Climax Cave, with the original group leading them back toward Razor Hall. Back at Razor Hall, the divers approached the black pool without hesitation. Their lights pierced the water as they slipped below the surface, scanning for any sign of Bruce. After several tense minutes underwater, the divers found Bruce's body. submerged 10 to 12 feet deep near the partition. In the dim pre-dawn light, rescuers stood together, drained, silent, and grieving. The toll of the night was etched into every face. Bruce wasn't just a guide, he was a friend, a mentor, a cornerstone of the caving community. His loss cut deep. Climax Cave hadn't changed. It was still beautiful, still brutal, an unyielding world beneath the surface. For those who enter, it demands respect. One mistake is all it takes. Bruce Brewer's final journey became a haunting reminder. In the depths of the earth, experience isn't always enough, and even the best can be lost. The recovery had to be precise. Every move was slow, calculated. Tight spaces and cold water made the task risky. When they finally brought Bruce to the surface of the pool, the mood shifted. The loss was real now. Their guide, so confident just hours earlier, was gone. Getting him out of Razor Hall was just the beginning. By 7:30 a.m., the recovery team surfaced to call in more help. News of the tragedy spread fast. Volunteers began arriving from across the region. By mid-afternoon, over 130 rescuers were on site. Cave experts, medics, and locals. Everyone wanted to help, but Climax Cave wasn't built for rescue. The same tight passages that made it famous now blocked their every move. The only solution? Widen them. Crews hauled in portable air hammers and chisels, slowly carving space through solid rock. It was loud, slow, exhausting work. The recovery dragged into the night. A 13-hour marathon that pushed people to their limits. At 4:19 a.m. Monday morning, Bruce's body finally emerged from Climax Cave. The mission was over, but the cost was burned into every person who'd helped. In caves like Climax, one misstep can echo for miles. Bruce Brewer's final dive reminded everyone why these places demand total respect. It was the morning of August 17th, 1997, when Eduardo Mendez packed the last of the diving gear into the van. He was getting ready to guide 5 tourists, 3 Americans and 2 Canadians, on a diving trip they'd never forget. For them, this excursion from Cozumel to the cenotes near Tulum was the highlight of their Mexican vacation. For Eduardo, it was just another day doing what he did best. At 28 years old, Eduardo had spent the past 3 years working as an open water diving instructor. He'd completed hundreds of dives in the beautiful Caribbean waters around Cozumel. But when it came to cave and cavern diving, his experience was limited. He knew the popular tourist routes well enough to lead a group, but he didn't have the specialized training needed for the unpredictable nature of true cave diving. The group set off at 7 a.m., taking the ferry from Cozumel to Playa del Carmen, then driving south to their first stop, Grand Cenote. After suiting up, they entered the clear, deep waters for their first dive. Everything went smoothly. They explored the stunning underwater passages and came out without any issues. By early afternoon, they had reached their second destination, the Temple of Doom. It got its name from its eerie, shadowy entrance and its tough diving conditions. Unlike the wide and welcoming opening of Grand Cenote, this one was a small dark hole in the jungle floor, just about 10 feet wide. A wooden ladder led 16 feet down to the water below. Still, the group was in good spirits as they geared up for their next dive. Among them was Rebecca Williams, a 34-year-old nurse from Boston. She helped her husband Mark check his gear before they entered the water. Both were newly certified open water divers, with just 12 dives recorded, and none in an overhead environment like this. Thomas Chen, a 42-year-old software engineer from Vancouver, had a bit more diving experience than the others, with about 30 dives under his belt. But he was still new to cenote diving. His wife, Lisa, 39, had completed 22 dives. The 5th tourist, Joy Johnson, a 28-year-old teacher from Chicago, had logged 20 dives but decided to sit this one out. She was feeling tired after the morning dive and chose to rest instead. None of the divers going in had the proper training, gear, or experience needed for true cave diving. They were using single tanks, had minimal lighting, and no backup systems. That setup might be okay for open water or supervised cavern dives, but beyond that point, it was extremely risky. Eduardo gave the group a short briefing. He talked about how beautiful the dive would be and reminded them to stay close and keep an eye on their air levels. But he didn't mention the specific dangers of diving in a cave environment. One by one, they slipped into the water. The cenote's surface was small, surrounded by tall limestone walls covered in hanging roots and vines. Unlike Grand Cenote, sunlight barely reached the water here. The space was dark, quiet, and mysterious, and the atmosphere only added to the thrill for the eager tourists. As they descended, they passed through something surreal, the halocline, where freshwater meets saltwater at around 33 feet deep. It created a shimmering blur in their vision, like diving through a heat wave underwater. It was a stunning, dreamlike sight. Once through, the cavern opened into a wide chamber. For about 20 minutes, the group swam around, exploring the space while still able to see the faint glow of sunlight from the entrance. Everything felt safe until Eduardo made a decision that would change everything. Instead of wrapping up the dive in the safety of the lit cavern zone, he led them deeper toward a tight passage known as the Madonna Passage. It was the clear boundary between the cavern and the true cave zone. 2 warning signs were posted underwater. One showed a diver with a red slash through it. The other was more direct. Stop. Prevent your death. Go no further. Eduardo swam right past them without hesitation. The others, trusting him completely, followed. The passage narrowed to just about 5 feet wide and 6 feet tall. A thin nylon guideline, the only way to safely find your way back, stretched forward into complete darkness. As they kept swimming, the entrance light behind them faded, and they were now deep in a real cave system. This was no place for casual divers. 10 minutes in, they had gone nearly 400 feet from the entrance. Their single tanks, meant for shorter open water dives, were draining fast. The deeper depth, constant movement, and growing stress were burning through their air supplies quickly. Thomas Chen was the first to show concern. He tapped his pressure gauge and signaled that his air was running low. Eduardo finally realized just how serious the situation was. He gave the signal. It was time to turn back, but inside the narrow Madonna Passage, trying to get 5 divers to reverse course wasn't easy. In the tight space, everyone's fins stirred up centuries-old silt from the cave floor. Within seconds, clear water turned into a thick cloud. Visibility dropped from feet to just inches. Eduardo pushed forward, thinking the group was right behind him. But in the chaos, Rebecca and Mark Williams got separated. The darkness and swirling silt left them completely disoriented. Believing they were heading for the exit, they unknowingly swam deeper into the cave system. Thomas and Lisa Chen stayed together, but they too lost sight of the guideline and headed off in a different direction. When Eduardo finally reached the cavern zone and turned to count heads, his heart sank. No one was behind him. He checked his air supply, dangerously low. He rushed to the surface where Joy was waiting and quickly swapped his nearly empty tank with her full one. Without wasting a second, he dove back in. This time, Eduardo followed the guideline deeper into the cave. Around 300 feet in, he spotted Lisa Chen. Her regulator had slipped from her mouth. She was desperately breathing from Thomas's backup air source. Thomas's own tank was almost empty. Eduardo moved fast. He shared his own air with Lisa and began guiding them toward the exit. Thomas, weak but still conscious, followed close behind, gripping the guideline tightly. As soon as they reached the cavern zone, Eduardo sent the Chens to the surface. Then, without resting, he turned around and went back in. About 50 meters, roughly 164 feet, into the passage, Eduardo found Rebecca Williams. She was unconscious, her tank empty. He grabbed her and rushed to the surface. Meanwhile, as the Chens tried to surface, Panic and low air threw everything into chaos. In their confusion, the couple became separated. Thomas had managed to stay on the right path and decided to surface alone, hoping to get help, not just for himself, but for his wife and the others still trapped below. Lisa, however, was overwhelmed. With her air running out and no one in sight, she panicked. Instead of continuing toward the surface, she turned back into the cave, possibly hoping Eduardo would find her and guide her out. Eduardo, still deep inside, pressed on through the silence and darkness. He eventually found Mark Williams, but what truly shocked him was seeing Lisa just a few meters behind. It was clear that she had lost her way during the exit and made the tragic decision to return. Both were floating motionless, their tanks empty, regulators still in their mouths. It was too late. By the time emergency services arrived, Rebecca had already been rushed to the nearest hospital in Tulum. Despite all efforts, she passed away later that evening due to drowning and severe oxygen deprivation. Specialized cave divers were called in to recover the bodies of Mark Williams and Lisa Chen. The official investigation revealed a chain of errors. The guide's reckless decision to enter a true cave system with divers who lacked the proper training and equipment, ignoring clear warning signs, poor air management, and no plan for emergencies. For the cave diving community, it was another painful reminder, another avoidable tragedy in the long history of Yucatan's cenotes. To this day, the warning signs at the entrance of the Madonna Passage remain exactly where they were, a silent plea to anyone who dares to go beyond. Our first story begins at the entrance of Bouvray Cave, a narrow hidden opening deep in the untouched wilderness of the southern highlands. From the outside, it looked like nothing special, but below that quiet entrance lay a maze of winding tunnels, sudden drops, and delicate rock formations. Because of its fragile ecosystem, the cave was usually kept locked and off-limits to the public. In May 2008, an experienced caver and photographer named Jeffrey McDonald got rare access to the cave. He arrived early on a Friday, ahead of his group, excited to explore and photograph its untouched beauty. His descent started out just fine. Using a metal collapsible ladder, he made his way into the first chamber. The air was heavy and still, filled with a damp, earthy smell. His headlamp lit up the slick, jagged limestone walls, glistening with moisture. Jeffrey had one goal: to reach a hidden chamber deep inside the cave, one that very few had ever seen. But to get there, he had to squeeze through a tight, vertical crack. It was narrow, claustrophobic, and barely wide enough to fit his body. He slid in feet first, carefully angling his body downward, using the stone walls to brace himself. Then, everything changed. With a sickening crunch, two large slabs of limestone suddenly broke loose and crushed down on him. One slammed into his hip, pinning him in place. The other jammed against his shoulder, trapping him in a vise of solid rock. His chest was squeezed tight. His arms were stuck at his sides. The freezing stone dug into his skin. And just like that, things went from tricky to terrifying. The way the rocks had him pinned twisted his body into a shape no human should ever be in. Jeffrey let out a sharp breath and tried to move. Nothing. His legs were useless, bent awkwardly beneath him. He gave it another go, this time using every ounce of strength to twist free. The rock didn't move an inch. That's when the panic hit. He called out, but his voice didn't carry. The cave swallowed the sound. No one heard him. No one was coming. Not yet. Jeffrey had trained for all kinds of challenges underground. But not this. He had no partner with him, no backup plan. All he could do now was survive. Outside the cave, no one had a clue what was happening. The others who were supposed to join him were still busy getting ready. No one noticed he was missing. In fact, that whole day passed, and not a single person realized he hadn't come back. Inside the cave, time lost all meaning. The silence was overwhelming, so quiet he could only hear his own fast, shallow breaths. He knew he couldn't last like this for long. Blood wasn't reaching his legs properly. His shoulder throbbed in pain. The cold was creeping into his bones, slowly making his body go numb. He had worn nylon overalls to keep warm, but against the cave's damp chill, they were useless. Eventually, the exhaustion took over. His body started to shut down, drifting in and out of sleep just to save energy. By Saturday, dehydration kicked in. His tongue felt swollen, his throat dry and burning. His muscles twitched without control, a clear sign that his body was weakening fast. He had no food, no water, just the crushing weight of the rock and the pitch-black darkness around him. How much time had passed? It wasn't until late Saturday morning that anyone finally noticed something was wrong. Jeffrey never showed up to meet his group that morning. No call, no message, nothing. By the time anyone realized he was missing, it was already too late for a quick rescue. At first, the group just assumed he was off exploring on his own. But when they saw his camping gear still untouched on Saturday morning, a terrible feeling set in. His camera and caving equipment were gone, but he hadn't told anyone where he was going. By noon, the park rangers were called, and by early Sunday morning, search teams had made their way to Bouvray Cave. The rescuers had a strong feeling about where he might be. Jeffrey was well known for his passion for photographing rare cave formations, and if he had chosen to enter any cave alone, chances were it was this one. There were over 400 caves in the area, but Bouvray Cave stood out. It was breathtaking, delicate, and barely ever visited. Jeffrey had talked about it before, how it hid secret chambers and incredible formations. If he had gone in, he was definitely alone, and no one had any idea how deep he might have gone. The rescue teams moved quickly. The cave entrance was locked with a metal gate to keep untrained explorers out. But now, it was a race against time. The cave required a key to enter, and when the search team arrived, they found the gate unlocked. That was all the confirmation they needed. Jeffrey had gone in. Just beyond the entrance, the cave dropped steeply into a wide chamber, where a cold, underground stream flowed across the floor. Rescuers moved carefully, scanning the walls for any hint of life. But the darkness seemed endless, swallowing every beam of light. Then, finally, a clue. Around 9 a.m., one of the team members spotted something. A metal collapsible ladder secured near a narrow vertical crack. Next to it, Jeffrey's backpack was left behind. One rescuer cautiously leaned over and pointed his headlamp into the gap. The light flickered off damp rock, revealing the narrow crevice below. And then, just past the shadows, they saw it. His helmet. He was still alive, barely. Jeffrey was slipping in and out of consciousness. His breathing was weak, and his words didn't make sense. Hypothermia had taken hold. They had to move fast. But his body was twisted in agony, jammed tightly between the rocks. Every movement risked making things worse. The rescuers tried to work around the sharp limestone, but the space was brutally tight. Barely enough room for even one person to reach in. The first rock, the one crushing Jeffrey's shoulder, had a bit of give. It took everything the rescuers had to shift it just enough to free his upper body. But the second rock, the one pinning his hip, refused to move. They tried digging around it, but it was too risky. One wrong move, and the entire limestone wall could collapse. Every decision was a gamble. Above ground, help was pouring in. Over 100 people, police, rescue teams, medics, and cave rescue volunteers rushed to the scene. This was quickly turning into one of the toughest cave rescues in Australian history. To move the rock safely, they brought in heavy-duty airbags, giant inflatable cushions made to shift massive stones without causing a cave-in. Rescuers carefully wedged them into the narrow crack and slowly inflated them, pushing the rock apart, millimeter by millimeter. It was a painfully slow process, and it took hours. Meanwhile, Jeffrey slipped in and out of consciousness. His body was shutting down, and his temperature was dropping to dangerous levels. Finally, the last rock gave way. His body, limp, cold, barely alive, was gently pulled free, arms first, through the narrow gap that had nearly become his grave. But the danger wasn't over yet. The cave was still a maze of tight passages and jagged rock, and getting him out was going to be just as hard. They had to move fast. Jeffrey needed medical care immediately. The team rigged up a vertical haul system, strapping him to a stretcher for the long, grueling climb out. The tunnel was so tight that every movement had to be planned. They used ropes and traverse lines to carefully lift him over massive boulders, some as big as cars, making sure not to jolt his fragile body. In some areas, they even had to widen the passage with tools. Slow, risky work in solid rock. The rescuers worked in shifts, completely exhausted. The air was thick and stale. Everyone was soaked in sweat and covered in mud. Every single inch of progress felt like a victory. The final stretch was the hardest. A tight bottleneck, so narrow it looked like the neck of an hourglass. Rescuers had to carefully chip away at the stone, just enough to slide the stretcher through without causing more harm to Jeffrey. Above ground, the surface team waited anxiously. Then, at 9:10 p.m. on Sunday, the first rescuer finally emerged from the cave. And moments later, Jeffrey's stretcher broke through the surface. He was barely conscious, his body bruised, cold, and broken. Medics rushed in to stabilize him. He was dangerously dehydrated, suffering from severe hypothermia, and barely clinging to life. Jeffrey was taken first to Goulburn Base Hospital, then transferred to Liverpool Hospital. His condition was critical, but soon doctors were able to stabilize him. He had spent 54 grueling hours trapped underground, but he survived. Bouvray Cave had nearly taken his life. Later, Jeffrey would admit he made a mistake, going in alone and underestimating just how dangerous the cave could be. He survived only because of sheer luck and the determination of the rescuers who refused to give up on him. His friend were off chasing another adventure. At just 21 years old, they'd already explored plenty of caves and felt sure of themselves as they returned to Agua Caliente Cave one last time before the new year. Tucked into the limestone hills just south of Tucson, Arizona, the cave had called them back, this time to go even deeper. The weather outside was cold, but the two young men didn't dress for the chill. Their tennis shoes weren't ideal, offering little ankle support, but they'd managed fine with them before. Each of them carried just one flashlight, their only source of light. Slung over Kevin's shoulder was 50 feet, around 15 meters, of half-inch thick polypropylene rope. The rope Kevin carried was crucial. It would help them get down a vertical drop known to cave explorers as the Loop Pit. At around 11 a.m., they squeezed through the upper entrance, a tight gap in the hillside, just big enough for one person at a time. The tunnel quickly narrowed, and they had to crawl on their hands and knees over jagged stone that scraped at their bare arms and legs. They didn't have a map. Instead, they were counting on memory from a previous trip when they had followed the loop in a counterclockwise direction and made it as far as the White Sand Room. This time, they planned to go the opposite way, taking the clockwise route through the cave. After about 8 minutes of careful movement, they reached the Loop Pit, a steep vertical drop plunging 40 feet or around 12 meters, down to the cave's lower level. They tied their rope to a solid rock sticking out of the wall, gave it a firm tug to make sure it was secure, and got ready to descend. But without proper rappelling gear, the kind experienced cavers used to safely control their descent, they were relying on pure strength and caution. One by one, they lowered themselves down the rope using just their hands, a risky technique that demands serious upper body strength. With the pit behind them, they pushed on, continuing their clockwise journey through tight tunnels that sometimes opened up into larger spaces where they could finally stand upright. By 1 p.m., they arrived at the White Sand Room, a chamber about 30 feet wide, just tall enough to stand in, with soft, pale sediment crunching under their feet like sand. They swept their flashlights across the walls, looking for the passage they had used during their last trip. But minutes turned into 30, and they still couldn't find it. Every corner, every opening looked the same. The rock formations played tricks on their memory, and the deeper they went, the more it felt like they were walking in circles. Panic started to creep in. They realized they were lost. Still, one thing gave them hope. They had stuck to a single path, always moving in the same direction. The only option now was to turn back and climb up the rope at the loop pit. It was 1:30 p.m., and with growing concern about time, they began retracing their steps. The way back felt longer, fatigue was kicking in, and with every step, doubt grew. Were they even heading the right way? But they stayed calm and trusted their instincts. Their flashlights, once bright and strong, were starting to fade as the batteries wore down. Then, finally, a wave of relief. They spotted the loop pit. They had made it back. Now, all that stood between them and the exit was the climb. At the bottom of the shaft, Kevin got ready. He looked up at the small, distant circle of black that marked the upper level. Gripping the rope tightly, he began the climb, hand over hand, foot by foot, into the darkness. The rough rope dug into his hands, and as sweat built up, his grip started to slip, but he kept going. Almost at the top, with his muscles burning from the climb, Kevin hit a problem, a patch of smooth, slippery rock known as flowstone. It had formed over thousands of years from water slowly running down the cave walls, leaving behind a hard, glassy surface. His tennis shoes, now dusty and worn, couldn't grip it at all. For a moment, he hung there, dangling in the dark, holding on with just the strength of his arms. Then, his grip gave out. The fall only lasted a few seconds, but to Kevin, it felt like forever. As he dropped, he instinctively wrapped his arms around his head. Then, impact. The crash knocked the air from his lungs, but somehow he wasn't seriously hurt. In pain and shaken, he lay still for a moment, catching his breath. Then, pushing past the fear, he stood up and approached the rope again. He wasn't giving up. Kevin started climbing once more, his arms shaking with exhaustion and leftover adrenaline. Again, he reached the slick flowstone. Again, his feet slipped. But this time, as he fell, something went horribly wrong. Kevin landed hard. Pain shot through his leg and hip like fire. He lay on the dusty cave floor, cheek pressed against the cold ground, barely able to breathe through the waves of agony. Every attempt to move sent sharp jolts through his body. It was clear, his upper leg, possibly even his pelvis, was broken. He couldn't walk. He couldn't climb. Trapped deep underground with no way out, Kevin was now living every cave explorer's worst nightmare. His friend knew there was no choice. He had to leave Kevin behind and go for help. Climbing back up the rope alone was tough, but fear and urgency gave him strength. When he finally stepped into the afternoon sunlight, it felt unreal after hours in the cave's choking darkness. But the nearest phone was still miles away, across rough and rocky terrain. It was close to 3 p.m. when he finally reached help and placed the emergency call, triggering a massive rescue effort. By 7 p.m., the Southern Arizona Rescue Association, or SARA, was officially notified. The first thing the rescue team focused on was checking his condition and making sure he was stable. They gently strapped him to a backboard to keep his spine and broken bones from shifting. They also started an IV to give him fluids, but didn't offer any food, water, or painkillers, just in case emergency surgery was needed once he reached the hospital. Getting someone out of a cave is nothing like a regular rescue. It's a whole different kind of challenge. The team had to set up 4 separate hauling systems, rope and pulley setups designed to move someone safely up steep, vertical sections of the cave. For almost the entire route, Kevin was belayed, tied in with safety ropes to make sure he didn't fall again, as rescuers slowly, carefully moved him through tight, twisting passages. These weren't tunnels meant for stretchers or backboards. Every inch was a struggle. At 11:15 p.m., almost 12 hours after first entering the cave, Kevin was finally hauled back up through the loop pit, the very place where everything had gone wrong. At the top, rescuers carefully moved him into a Stokes litter, a special basket stretcher made for tough rescues like this. When Kevin was finally pulled out through the lower entrance at 2 a.m. on New Year's Day, the freezing night air hit him hard. Normally, the cave's constant 72 degrees would have felt warm, but after hours of being still and injured, hypothermia had become a real threat. Half an hour later, a rescue helicopter airlifted Kevin to the University Medical Center, and there, doctors discovered something unbelievable. Despite all the pain he'd endured and everything the rescuers had feared, Kevin had no broken bones. He was covered in bruises, cuts, and scrapes, but somehow he'd avoided any fractures. It was nothing short of a miracle. July 25th, 2015. The summer heat was intense, with the temperature reaching 89 degrees Fahrenheit, or 32 degrees Celsius. The air was thick and humid, making it hard to stay cool. Senior Airman Drew Belair wiped the sweat from his forehead as he packed his gear into the trunk of the rental car. At just 20 years old, Drew was far from his quiet hometown of Osage, Iowa. He had been sent on temporary duty to Anderson Air Force Base, thousands of miles from the cornfields he grew up around. For weeks, he had been waiting for this weekend trip. After long days of military work under the hot Pacific sun, the thought of swimming in cool, fresh water felt like a dream. His new friends from the base had told him all about Marbo Cave, a place where hidden pools lay inside limestone caves deep in the jungle. They called it a secret paradise. For someone like Drew, who had spent his childhood swimming in muddy ponds and rivers, the idea of diving into a crystal-clear cave pool felt too good to miss. The drive there took them through narrow, winding roads lined with thick green jungle, tall coconut trees, and wild plants. When they finally reached the start of the trail, Drew felt his heartbeat speed up. The entrance to Marbo Cave was hidden under a thick roof of old trees, and the only way down was a steep, tricky path through sharp limestone rocks. The ground dropped suddenly in places, giving brief views of sparkling blue water far below. The air itself felt heavy with mystery, almost as if it was warning them of what lay ahead. Going down wasn't easy. At the bottom, the cave opened up into a scene that was both beautiful and a little frightening. The main pool was huge, about 100 feet or 30 meters across. The water was so clear, Drew could see the rocky bottom 15 feet, or around 4.5 meters below. But what really caught his eye were the dark shapes under the surface, openings to underwater cave tunnels that led who knew where. He dipped his toe in the water and quickly pulled back, surprised by how cold it was. After the burning heat outside, the cool air inside the cave felt like walking into a dream. It was nature's version of air conditioning. The water was a perfect 78 degrees Fahrenheit, or 26 degrees Celsius, a big change from the hot, sticky world above. Drew's friends were already swimming, their voices bouncing off the cave walls as they explored the connected pools. Some of them dove underwater, disappearing into dark tunnels, only to pop up moments later in different parts of the cave, laughing and shouting about what they had found. Drew watched with growing excitement. He couldn't resist any longer. He had always been a strong swimmer, ever since he was a kid. Back in Iowa, he had spent hours at the local quarry, diving deep and holding his breath longer than anyone else. These underwater passages felt like the perfect challenge, a chance to push himself further than ever before. He took a few deep breaths in a row, quick and sharp, to fill his lungs with as much oxygen as possible, a trick he had learned from other divers. The smooth limestone walls around him felt alive, almost like they were waiting for him to begin. And with one final breath, he got ready to dive into the unknown. The moment Drew slipped under the surface, the water felt smooth like silk against his skin. It was like entering another world. Sunlight filtered through cracks above, casting a soft blue-green glow that moved gently across the limestone walls. Tiny fish, shining like little jewels, swam quickly between the rocks. Everything was quiet. Then he saw it. One of the cave openings his friends had talked about. About 8 feet or 2.4 meters below the surface was a dark hole in the rock. It looked just big enough for someone to swim through. Drew remembered hearing that some of these passages led to secret air pockets, small rooms hidden inside the cave where you could come up for air, take a break, and then keep going. It sounded like something out of a movie. Feeling calm and sure of himself, Drew took a strong kick forward and headed for the opening. His lungs still felt full, his body light and controlled. As he swam into the narrow passage, the limestone walls began to close in around him. Within seconds, the bright entrance behind him disappeared, and he was deep inside the unknown. The tunnel curved gently upward at first, just like Drew expected. It was supposed to lead to a small chamber filled with air. But something didn't feel right. The passage kept going, much farther than he thought it would. His gut told him he had been underwater for nearly a minute, way longer than the few seconds his friends had talked about. The tunnel twisted and split in strange ways, nothing like the simple path he had imagined. And the gentle rise he expected, it was nowhere to be found. Drew's chest started to tighten. That first warning sign hit. His body was running low on oxygen. Inside, alarms were going off. His brain was shouting, "Get air, now." But all he could see ahead was more darkness. No sign of the air pocket he had counted on. A cold wave of panic slowly crept in, like ice spreading through his veins. Somehow, he had taken a wrong turn. This wasn't the same tunnel his friends had described. Instead of a short, easy swim to a safe spot, just 20 feet or 6 meters away, Drew had entered a twisting maze of stone that seemed to go on forever into the deep, black unknown. Drew tried to turn back, but the tunnel was so tight it barely gave him any room. The rough limestone scraped against his skin as he struggled to twist around in the narrow space. Panic took over. His movements became clumsy, his brain foggy from the lack of oxygen. It felt like he was swimming through thick syrup, every motion slow and heavy. What had seemed like a short swim earlier now felt endless, like the tunnel was stretching out in front of him. His vision started to fade. Black spots danced around the edges of his sight. Back on the surface, far above, his friends were beginning to worry. At first, they thought he was just exploring longer than usual. But when the minutes kept passing with no sign of him, concern turned into panic. They dove again and again, checking every entrance, calling his name underwater, hoping he'd hear and respond. Meanwhile, deep inside the cave, Drew was losing strength fast. His strong, steady strokes turned weak and shaky. The cave walls felt like they were closing in. His mind, desperate for air, could no longer tell which way was out. He was trapped, lost inside a twisting underwater maze, with his life hanging by a thread. When Drew didn't come back up after several minutes, they sprang into action, organizing a desperate search. Taking turns, they dove again and again, pushing themselves to the limit. Each of them tried to go as deep as possible, checking every tunnel and shadow they could reach. But Marbo Cave wasn't just one big pool. It was a massive, twisting network of underwater tunnels, with dozens of paths leading off in every direction. It was easy to get lost, even for someone who knew the area well. And without any proper diving equipment, there was only so much they could do. They had to rely on holding their breath, and every dive was a race against time. Meanwhile, deep inside that stone maze, Drew's body was failing. His muscles, completely drained of oxygen, had stopped responding. One of Drew's friends made a split-second choice. He scrambled up the steep rocky path, cutting through the thick jungle, desperately trying to reach a spot with cell phone signal. But Marbo Cave sat in a remote part of the island, far from the nearest emergency team. Even with the call made, help was still several long minutes away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, trained rescue divers arrived, carrying full scuba gear, ready to go where others couldn't. They searched the underwater passages methodically, following the possible routes Drew might have taken. Then, in a narrow tunnel about 40 feet, or 12 meters, from the main entrance, they found him. It was a tight, unforgiving section of the cave with no air pocket, no clear exit, and no mercy. Jackson Blue Springs in Florida is one of the most demanding cave diving sites. On November 4th, 2014, two seasoned divers set out for a deep dive into its hidden tunnels. Their target, the deeper sections of Jackson Blue. A gold-colored guideline known as the Golden Line started at the entrance and led into the twisting underwater cave, crucial for navigating back out. This system had been built by Florida's cave diving community over years of mapping the underground network. The gold line marked main paths, while white lines pointed to explored side tunnels. But those white lines were never connected to the main route. It was all about safety. If visibility dropped, the gold line would be the diver's lifeline, leading them back to the surface and away from deadly confusion in the dark. Their dive scooters buzzed to life as they dropped into Jackson Blue's crystal clear waters. These vehicles, vital for serious cave exploration, carried them smoothly through tunnels that would drain any diver relying only on fins. Both divers were heavily loaded. Primary gas tanks, backups, lights, and the tools needed to survive one of Florida's toughest cave systems. The Golden Line guided them forward as they pushed deeper into the system. At 2,300 feet from the entrance, they arrived at a known location, the trash room. Here, the cave forced a choice. The main tunnel, marked by the trusted gold line, veered sharply to the left. But ahead was a second option, the rabbit hole bypass. This route wasn't for beginners. It was a tight technical challenge, skipped by most divers and missing from many maps. Only highly skilled cave explorers even considered going through it. For those who dared, it was a test, one that separated experienced cave divers from everyone else. And on this day, both men decided to take it. The bypass was infamous, tight spaces and silty floors that could trap divers in a zero visibility nightmare if disturbed. On their return, the divers reached the junction, focused on managing air supply and navigating their way out. Cave diving demanded constant attention, monitoring gas, tracking exit points, and staying on the Golden Line, their lifeline to the surface. But managing scooters, gear, and the subtle shift in tunnel layout caused a critical mistake. They missed the sharp left turn. Unaware, they continued straight into the rabbit hole bypass, without realizing they'd taken a wrong turn. At first, everything seemed normal. The tunnel looked like the main passage, wide enough for scooters, clear enough for smooth movement. Nothing stood out. No warning signs, no resistance. So they kept going. Their scooters hummed forward, the tunnel still roomy and easy to navigate. Everything felt right. Each diver carried 4 tanks, 2 main side mounts, and 2 stage bottles, making their profiles bulky and harder to maneuver through tight spaces. That's when the cave changed. The walls slowly closed in. The once clear passage began to shrink. Limestone narrowed the route, pressing in on their gear. The farther they went, the tighter it became, until their equipment, once manageable, now became an obstacle. Their scooters, built for open water speed, became a problem in the narrowing tunnel. Decades of untouched sediment lay waiting. One wrong move, and it would all turn to fog. At the tightest point, physics took over. The combined bulk of scooters, tanks, and human bodies couldn't pass through the small opening ahead. As they tried to maneuver, their gear scraped against the walls, kicking up fine silt from the floor and ceiling. The clear water turned into a thick, blinding cloud. Visibility dropped to 0. The lead diver was now in the worst-case scenario, a common factor in cave diving fatalities. He was stuck, surrounded by gear, in a space too small to turn around or retreat. His breathing gas continued ticking down, and the restriction that triggered the silt out now blocked any easy escape with full gear. Behind him, his partner had avoided becoming fully trapped. He backed out into clearer water, regaining visibility. From there, he could think. He could assess. But his partner was still inside, stuck in the silty chaos. No light, no clear exit, no room to move. The second diver did what cave diving protocols required. He pulled back to the main line, confirming his route by finding the familiar gold guideline that led to safety. His mission wasn't escape, it was urgency. He had to get out fast and summon help for the diver still trapped below. Meanwhile, the lead diver waited. The swirling sediment began to settle. In caves, time moves differently. The cloud that blinded him slowly dropped back to the floor, grain by grain. As visibility returned, he carefully started to move. Inch by inch, he backed out of the restriction, taking advantage of every bit of cleared water. Eventually, he made it out of the bypass and spotted the main passage, and the golden line. But the numbers in his head weren't comforting. The emergency had burned through his breathing gas far faster than expected. He had stretched his limits. Luckily, he knew this system well, and knew of a cached safety bottle placed earlier by another diver. In the cave diving community, these backup resources are lifesavers, positioned with teamwork in mind. He found the emergency supply and added it into his plan. That extra gas gave him a chance. Still, the danger wasn't over. His margins were razor thin, and one mistake could undo everything. Even with the added air, he needed help, fast. He began making his way out, careful, slow, but with a new hope, hoping help would be waiting when he surfaced. As he neared the cavern zone, where faint natural light began to pierce the water, he met Ed Sorensen, a veteran cave rescue diver who had answered the emergency call. Sorensen's arrival turned a near disaster into a controlled rescue. With deep knowledge of Jackson Blue and years of rescue experience, he added critical safety to the final stretch. Working together, they moved steadily toward the surface. The second diver, after calling for help, returned underwater to support the exit. Now, with 3 divers coordinating, the operation became a careful, managed retreat. One by one, they emerged from Jackson Blue Spring without further complications. Their survival wasn't luck, it was the result of shared knowledge, practiced protocols, and hard-earned skills that separate technical cave diving from ordinary diving. That day, the rabbit hole bypass took no lives, but it issued a stark warning. In caves like these, precision isn't optional, it's the only way back out. Medvedenius Spilia, also called Monk Seal Cave, is the longest cave on the beautiful Basevo Island, stretching an impressive 524 feet. It got its name from the Mediterranean monk seal, a rare and fascinating creature that used to live in these waters. The cave's entrance is breathtaking. Soaring up to 88 feet high, it almost feels like stepping into another world. This entrance, known as Poseidon's Gate, leads into the longest partially submerged sea cave on the eastern Adriatic coast. Back in the 1960s, monk seals started disappearing from the Adriatic Sea, but in recent years, they've slowly returned. Inside, sunlight filters through at just the right angles during certain times of the day, creating a magical glow. But after about 131 feet, the cave narrows too much for boats to continue. Interestingly, monk seals can hold their breath for up to 10 minutes, allowing them to explore the cave far beyond where humans can go. Haley McCarthy and Stacy Liam became dive buddies after discovering their shared passion for exploring the underwater world. They first met during their open water diving certification and quickly formed a strong friendship. From that day on, they stuck together, always encouraging and supporting each other in their diving adventures. As they gained more experience, Haley and Stacy set their sights on a bigger challenge: cave diving certification. They made a promise to take on an incredible adventure together. Their dream destination? The famous Monk Seal Cave, known for its stunning beauty and rich history. Finally, the big day arrived. Haley and Stacy boarded their privately hired tour boat and set off for Monk Seal Cave. At exactly 2:32 p.m., they reached their dive site, eager to begin. They carefully suited up, double-checking every piece of equipment to make sure it was secure and working perfectly. Their goal for this dive was to reach a depth of 98 feet. Interestingly, at that depth, water pressure is about 3 times stronger than at the surface, making every movement and breath a bit more intense. But for Haley and Stacy, the thrill of the dive made it all worth it. Haley opted for twin independent 12-liter tanks, both filled with nitrox 27. To make her ascent safer, she also carried extra stage cylinders with different gas mixes, nitrox 40 and nitrox 80, for decompression. Stacy, on the other hand, chose to use a rebreather which was set up with Trimix 12/60 as the diluent. She also had a bailout cylinder filled with nitrox 28, just in case. Since caves get pitch dark, both divers brought powerful dive torches to light their way. Taking a deep breath, they slipped beneath the water, ready to uncover the mysteries of Monk Seal Cave. As they descended, the scenery changed. The cave ceiling loomed overhead, and the light faded into deep blue darkness. The water was crystal clear, revealing a hidden world few get to see. After a moment, they paused at 13 feet for a bubble check, a quick safety step to ensure their gear was working perfectly with no leaks. Then, with everything in order, they continued their dive, finally reaching their target depth of 98 feet. Rebreathers, like the one Stacy used, recycle exhaled air by removing carbon dioxide and adding oxygen, allowing divers to stay underwater much longer than with traditional scuba tanks. Completely captivated by the underwater beauty around them, Haley and Stacy decided to explore even deeper. With a quick nod of agreement, they descended another 32 feet, eager to see more. But soon, it was time to head back. Knowing the importance of proper decompression, they signaled to each other that they should begin their ascent. As they rose 16 feet, they suddenly realized they had drifted off their planned dive path. Staying calm, they took a moment to scan their surroundings and check their map. After carefully reorienting themselves, they managed to get back on track, letting out a quiet sigh of relief. About 32 feet further along, Haley, using an open circuit system, deployed a delayed surface marker buoy, DSMB. This small gas-filled buoy is an important tool for divers, especially near the end of a dive. It signals their ascent, provides a clear visual reference along the line, and lets the boat crew at the surface track their exact location. As Stacy continued her ascent, rising about 18 feet from their last position, she deployed her own DSMB. After successfully releasing it, she noticed that Haley had moved roughly 6 feet above her. Wanting to stay close, Stacy picked up her pace, trying to catch up. But something wasn't right. Haley was ascending much faster than expected, quickly widening the gap between them. Realizing this, Stacy made a smart decision to slow down, adjusting her speed once she reached around 82 feet from their original depth. She assumed Haley would stay visible along the DSMB line and that they would regroup at 39 feet as planned. But as Stacy gradually ascended to that depth, she realized they had become separated. Though worried, she remained focused, following the required decompression stops. To ensure her safe return to the surface, rapid ascents can be dangerous for divers, potentially leading to decompression sickness, also known as the bends. That's why proper ascent control and safety stops are so crucial in deep diving. After completing her decompression stops, Stacy surfaced and swam back to the dive boat. She wasn't expecting to see Haley there yet. Since Haley was using an open circuit system, she likely had longer decompression requirements. Then, something caught Stacy's eye. Haley's DSMB was still floating upright, with about half of it submerged. A growing sense of unease settled in. As the minutes passed, Stacy grew more concerned. After waiting about 35 minutes, she asked the boat crew to move closer, hoping to spot bubbles that might indicate Haley's location. But even after repositioning, there were none in sight. Determined to find her friend, Stacy suited up and dove back into the water. She swam about 65 feet toward the DSMB, scanning the depths. When she got closer, she spotted the reel still attached. But Haley was nowhere to be found. With no other option, Stacy surfaced again to alert the boat crew that her friend was missing. When the crew retrieved the reel, they noticed something strange. About 22 feet of the line had been unspooled. This only deepened the mystery of what had happened to Haley. Realizing the urgency of the situation, the dive boat skipper wasted no time. A mayday call was sent out, and nearby boats were alerted to join the search. A total of 6 boats, including an RNLI lifeboat, sprang into action. They scanned the surface, hoping to catch sight of Haley. Every minute that passed without a sign of her only added to the growing fear. But, despite their efforts, she never appeared. With no other options, 2 experienced divers were sent down for a search and rescue mission. After carefully combing the depths, they finally found Haley at 72 feet, floating lifelessly in the water. It was the heartbreaking confirmation they had dreaded. Her body was gently brought to the surface, where the waiting lifeboat crew solemnly witnessed the tragedy unfold. As the team examined Haley's diving gear, they found something puzzling. All her cylinders were still full of gas, and her regulators were working perfectly. This left the rescuers questioning what could have caused her tragic and untimely death. With heavy hearts, they carefully transported her body back to shore. Once medical personnel conducted an examination, the heartbreaking truth was revealed. Haley had suffered a heart attack. While diving is generally safe with proper training, underlying heart conditions can increase the risk. The pressure changes, and cold water can put extra strain on the heart, making regular medical checkups essential for divers.